In the final stage of the twin flame journey, something becomes undeniable. It's not the masculine who moves first. It's you. Not because you're meant to chase, not because you're meant to carry both roles, but because the feminine is the one who sets the field. When you stop waiting, the energy shifts. When you choose yourself, the cycle breaks. When your silence holds more power than your words, he feels it in his soul. Union doesn't begin the moment he acts. It begins the moment you remember who you are. And when you step into that truth, he can no longer run. Why the feminine must move first. There comes a stage in the twin flame journey when all the running, all the chasing, all the confusion reaches a breaking point. You realize something profound. The masculine cannot move first, not in this final stage. His awakening, his actions, his ability to step toward you are all catalyzed by you, the feminine. Not by what you do externally, but by what you embody internally. This is not about chasing him. It is not about trying harder, reaching out, or proving your worth. That was the old cycle, the endless push and pull where his fear of the connection kept him running and your longing kept you waiting. What shifts the dynamic is not effort, but alignment. When the feminine fully chooses herself, she initiates the frequency of union. She becomes the energetic ground that the masculine cannot help but respond to. Think of it this way. The divine feminine is the vessel of receptivity, intuition, and embodiment. She feels the union long before it manifests. She carries the codes in her body. She becomes the living resonance of what love truly is. And when she anchors that within herself, when she no longer waits for him to define it, but instead becomes it, the masculine feels the shift in his own field. He may not understand it with his mind, but his soul does. Why must the feminine move first? Because the masculine's role is to reflect, to respond, to act in alignment with what already exists in the unseen. His awakening often comes later because he has been conditioned to deny his intuition, to bury his feelings, to hold back from vulnerability. But the feminine, in her softness, her willingness, her courage to feel, becomes the spark that ignites his remembrance. She doesn't awaken him by trying to wake him up. She awakens him by living in her truth so fully that he can no longer deny his own. This is why the journey often feels so heavy for the feminine. She carries the responsibility of being the first to step into surrender. She is the one who must break the cycle, not by forcing him to stay, but by refusing to abandon herself. When she stops needing him to validate the connection, when she stops grasping at signs to prove it's real, when she anchors into her own wholeness, something sacred happens. The chasing ends. The running loses power. The entire field shifts. And here's the paradox. Moving first doesn't mean doing more. It means doing less. It means letting go of proving, pushing, controlling. It means dropping back into her natural state, receptive, magnetic, whole. From this space, her presence alone becomes the movement. Her stillness becomes the invitation. Her sovereignty becomes the call that reaches him even in silence. If you look back, you'll notice this pattern. Every time you chose yourself, every time you focused on your healing instead of his silence, every time you reclaimed your energy from waiting, he felt it. Sometimes he pulled closer. Sometimes he resisted harder. But he felt it, because your field is the one that sets the tone. So in this final stage, the question isn't, when will he act? The question is, have I stepped into my own truth yet? Because the masculine cannot face you until you have faced yourself. He cannot love you fully until you have chosen to love yourself completely. He cannot stand in his alignment until you have anchored yours. This is why the feminine must move first. Not because the masculine is weak, but because this is how the blueprint was written. The feminine leads energetically. The masculine follows with action. And when she finally embraces her role, not by chasing him, but by embodying love, the union that once felt delayed begins to unfold naturally. So ask yourself, am I waiting for him to validate this? Or am I willing to become the living proof that union already exists within me? Because the moment you step into that, he will no longer be able to run. For so long, the pattern has been the same. He runs, you chase. He withdraws, you try to reach. He silences himself, and you fill the void with questions, messages, prayers, or waiting. This cycle is exhausting, and it always leaves you feeling smaller than you are. Why? Because pursuit keeps the energy unbalanced. It signals to the universe that union is something outside of you, something you must convince him to give, something you must strive to earn. But that has never been the truth. The truth is that union begins in stillness. Not passive waiting, not hopeless resignation, but a stillness that is alive, magnetic, unshakable. The feminine's power lies not in chasing, but in anchoring herself so deeply in her own essence that she becomes the very frequency of home. And when she does this, the masculine has nothing left to run from. Pursuit is born of fear. Fear that he will forget. Fear that the connection isn't real. Fear that if you stop reaching, it will all fall apart. But fear is the energy that fuels separation. When you shift into stillness, you communicate something entirely different. I already know. I already hold. I already am. In this place, you are no longer seeking union outside of you because you've embodied it within yourself. Stillness doesn't mean closing the door on him. It doesn't mean giving up on the connection. It means no longer leaking your energy into chasing shadows. It means resting in your knowing, even when the physical evidence isn't here yet. It's saying, I don't need to convince him. The truth already exists. My role is simply to embody it. Think of how powerful this is. When you stop moving toward him, the field shifts. The old dynamic of runner and chaser collapses. He feels it. He may not have words for it, but his soul does. Suddenly, the energy he once pushed against is no longer reaching for him. The silence that once felt like safety begins to feel like absence. The escape routes he once used to distract himself no longer satisfy him. And why? Because your stillness is louder than pursuit. The divine feminine leads not by force, but by frequency. When she embodies stillness, she becomes undeniable. Her presence vibrates in his field even when no words are spoken. Her silence speaks. Her energy becomes a mirror that forces him to face what he has been avoiding, not because she told him to, but because he can no longer escape the truth vibrating between them. This is why the masculine often begins to feel restless when the feminine stops chasing. The dynamic that once kept him safe from himself starts to unravel. In her stillness, he is confronted with his own longing. In her silence, he hears his own soul. And in her refusal to pursue, he finally feels the weight of his own responsibility. Stillness is not weakness. It is mastery. It is the feminine remembering that her worth is not proven by how much she gives, how hard she tries, or how long she waits. Her worth is inherent. And when she anchors in that truth, everything changes. This is the power of the feminine in the final stage. Not to do more, but to become more. To become so rooted in love, so grounded in her knowing, that her very presence calls him forward, not with words, not with effort, but with truth. So ask yourself, am I still pursuing him in ways big or small? Or am I willing to let stillness speak for me? Because in the end, it is not the chase that brings union. It is the feminine stillness that sets him free to finally move. One of the hardest lessons in the twin flame journey is realizing that the breakthrough does not come when you finally convince him to choose you. It comes when you finally choose yourself. At first, this sounds backwards. How could choosing yourself have anything to do with union? Isn't the point that he recognizes you, that he returns, that he stands beside you? Yes, but he cannot do that until you model it, until you embody it, until you stop abandoning yourself in the name of waiting for him. Choosing yourself doesn't mean closing your heart to him. It doesn't mean rejecting the union or pretending you don't care. It means no longer sacrificing your peace, your joy, your truth, for the sake of keeping a space for someone who isn't showing up yet. It means no longer holding yourself hostage to his healing process. It means deciding that your wholeness matters, whether he comes now, later, or never. This is where the feminine's true power lies, not in what she gives to him, but in what she refuses to give up in herself. For so long, you've carried the weight of both your process and his. You've tried to be patient, to understand his fears, to explain away his silences. You've given chance after chance, energy after energy, hoping that this time it would click for him. But that cycle only reinforces his avoidance, because if you won't choose yourself, why should he? When the feminine finally says, "I choose me," the entire field changes. Not from bitterness, not from anger, but from sovereignty. She says, "I am whole already. I am not waiting to be completed. I am not waiting to be validated. I am not waiting for someone else to give me what I can anchor within myself." That choice is magnetic. That choice is undeniable, and the masculine feels it in ways he cannot explain. It is in that moment that he begins to see her differently, not as the one who is always there no matter what, not as the safety net he can run back to after cycles of avoidance, but as the divine feminine, sovereign, whole, radiant. And when he sees her standing in her truth, he realizes that if he doesn't rise, he will lose the very thing his soul craves most. Choosing yourself does not push him away. It creates the conditions where he must face himself. Because as long as you keep prioritizing him over you, he can keep hiding. He can keep running. He can keep avoiding his own growth. But the moment you step fully into your own wholeness, you hold up a mirror that shows him exactly what he is missing by not stepping into his. This is why so many divine feminines notice that the real turning point in their journey came not when he changed, but when they did, when they stopped chasing, when they stopped begging, when they stopped making themselves small, and when they started living as if their life was already full, already radiant, already complete. That's when his energy shifted. That's when he began to feel the gravity of her absence. That's when he realized she wasn't waiting anymore. Choosing yourself first is not abandonment of the connection. It is alignment with it. Because union cannot be built on self-abandonment. It cannot be sustained by sacrifice. It can only be anchored by two whole beings who choose each other freely, not out of need, but out of truth. So ask yourself, am I still waiting for him to choose me, or have I chosen myself? Because the moment you do, everything changes. For you, for him, and for the union. If there is one pattern that has defined your journey up to this point, it is the endless loop of running and chasing. He runs, you chase. He hides, you search. He avoids, you explain. And though the details may change, different words, different silences, different situations, the energy remains the same. A cycle that traps both of you in fear rather than truth. The runner-chaser dynamic is not about who loves more or who cares less. It is about fear on both sides. The masculine runs because the intensity of the connection threatens every defense he has built to survive in this world. It mirrors back to him his deepest wounds, his fear of abandonment, his belief that he is unworthy of love, his terror of vulnerability. To him, facing you feels like facing everything he has avoided for years. And the feminine chases because the intensity of separation feels unbearable. She can sense the truth of the connection so clearly, so deeply, that watching him deny it feels like suffocation. Her heart knows what he cannot admit yet, and in her desperation to keep the connection alive, she pours all of her energy outward, reaching, holding, waiting, proving. But here is the truth. Chasing him never brings him closer. Running never brings him relief. Both feed the same cycle of fear. The more you chase, the more he runs. The more he runs, the more you chase. And in that loop, neither of you stands in your truth. Breaking this cycle does not happen when he stops running. It happens when you stop chasing. Because the feminine is the energetic anchor of this connection. When she pulls her energy back into herself, not out of punishment, not out of resentment, but out of sovereignty, the field shifts. Suddenly there is nothing for him to run from, because no one is chasing. Suddenly, he is left alone with the one thing he has been avoiding all along: himself. This is the paradox of union. The way forward is not pursuit, but stillness. It is not demanding his presence, but embodying your own. when you choose yourself first, when you stop running from your own wounds by focusing on His, when you anchor in your wholeness instead of His absence, the dynamic collapses. The old roles of runner and chaser can no longer survive in that energy. And what happens then? He feels it. He may not have words for it, but his soul recognizes the change. The silence that once felt like safety now feels like loss. The freedom he thought he gained by running now feels like emptiness. The distractions that once worked suddenly ring hollow. Without the chase, running no longer brings relief. It brings despair. And that is when the masculine begins to shift. Not because you demanded it, but because he can no longer deny the truth. For you, the feminine, this is the most powerful act you can take. To break the cycle by refusing to play your old role in it. To stop pouring energy into pursuit and instead pour it into yourself. To let your wholeness, not your desperation, set the tone. This is not easy. It requires trust. It requires surrender. It requires you to sit in the ache of not knowing what he will do and still choose yourself anyway. But when you do, you open the door to something new. You create the space for the union to shift from fear to truth, from running and chasing to meeting and receiving. You show the universe that you are ready not for half of him, not for glimpses of him, but for all of him. So ask yourself, am I still chasing in ways big or small? Am I still holding the role of the one who carries the connection for both of us? Or am I willing to step out of the cycle and let my stillness speak louder than my pursuit? Because the moment you do, the running loses its power, and the path to union finally begins to open. There is a moment in the twin flame journey when words no longer carry the weight they once did. Promises, explanations, even confessions begin to feel hollow, not because they are meaningless, but because the truth of the connection is not sustained by speech. It is sustained by energy. And in this final stage, the feminine silence begins to speak louder than anything she could ever say. For so long, silence felt like a wound. When he withdrew, when he disappeared, when he refused to express what you knew he felt, that silence was almost unbearable. It echoed as rejection, abandonment, denial. It made you question yourself, doubt the connection, even wonder if you were imagining everything. You longed for words because you thought they would prove what your soul already knew. But something shifts when the feminine steps into her power. She no longer fills the silence with explanations. She no longer begs for clarity. She no longer stretches herself thin to prove the truth of what she feels. Instead, she allows her stillness to carry the message. And that silence, not born of fear, but of sovereignty, shakes the masculine to his core. Why? Because silence from a place of wholeness is not absence. It is presence magnified. When you withdraw your energy from chasing, your silence becomes a mirror. He can no longer confuse avoidance with freedom. He can no longer run without feeling the weight of what he is losing. Suddenly, the quiet that once protected him becomes unbearable. The feminine's silence does not push him away. It pulls him inward, toward himself, toward the truth he has tried so hard to deny. This is why your silence is so powerful. It is not the silence of giving up. It is the silence of standing in truth. It says without words, I know who I am. I know what this connection is. I will not beg you to see it. I will not convince you to choose it. I will embody it and let you face your own choice. That kind of silence rings louder than any demand. The masculine feels this. He may not say it, but he feels it in his restlessness, in the way his escapes no longer satisfy him, in the way your absence feels heavier than your presence ever did. He hears it in his own soul, the same way you once heard his silence echoing through yours. And in that reversal, something profound happens. He begins to realize that you are no longer waiting. This is the point where silence transforms from pain into power. It is no longer about suffering in the absence of words. It is about anchoring so deeply into your knowing that words become unnecessary. You don't need his confirmation because you already embody the confirmation. You don't need his promises because you already live in alignment with the truth of the union. And in that space, your silence invites him in a way your words never could. It does not demand. It does not chase. It does not negotiate. It simply exists, clear, undeniable, magnetic, and that is what calls him forward, not to relieve your pain, but to face his own. So ask yourself, is my silence coming from fear or from power? Am I withdrawing to protect myself? Or am I holding stillness because I finally know who I am? Because when silence comes from truth, it speaks louder than any words you could say. There comes a turning point in the journey when the divine feminine realizes the most magnetic thing she could ever do is not to chase, not to wait, not to prove, but to stand in her sovereignty. Sovereignty is not isolation. It is not rejecting him or closing herself off from love. Sovereignty is the radiant wholeness of a woman who knows she is complete within herself. And because of that, she becomes the most irresistible invitation to truth the masculine has ever encountered. For so long, the energy of the journey was marked by imbalance. She longed, he avoided, she chased, he ran. She explained, he denied. And beneath all of it was the unspoken fear. If I stand fully in my power, will I lose him? That fear kept the feminine small, giving, overextending, trying to soften her light so that he could handle it. But the paradox is this: when she dims herself to keep him close, he only runs farther. When she stands in her full radiance, when she chooses her sovereignty, that is when he cannot look away. Why? Because the masculine was never running from her. He was running from himself. And the clearer, stronger, and more grounded she becomes, the more his own soul awakens to what he has been avoiding. He begins to see her not as a figure to fear, not as a mirror that exposes his wounds, but as the embodiment of everything he longs for. Her sovereignty becomes the proof that love does not mean loss of self. It means becoming more of who you already are. Sovereignty means the feminine no longer abandons herself in the name of connection. She doesn't shrink to be chosen. She doesn't wait endlessly in silence that drains her life. She doesn't measure her worth by his readiness. She steps fully into her life, her purpose, her joy. She builds, creates, and shines, not as a performance to attract him, but as the natural overflow of a soul that has remembered her own divinity. This energy is magnetic beyond words, because when she no longer seeks from him what she has already found within herself, he feels it. The weight of responsibility shifts. He cannot hide behind excuses anymore, because she is no longer giving him her energy to carry. Instead, her sovereignty holds up a mirror. This is what wholeness looks like. This is what truth feels like. This is what you could choose if you are willing. The masculine feels this invitation not in his mind, but in his body, in his soul. He may feel restless. He may feel drawn back to her without knowing why. He may begin to notice that other connections, other relationships, other distractions feel shallow compared to the depth she embodies now. Her sovereignty disrupts the illusions he once leaned on, because now he can see the difference between survival and love, between distraction and destiny. This is why sovereignty is not the end of the connection, but the beginning of true union. Because union cannot come from need, it can only come from choice. And when the feminine no longer needs him to complete her, when she stands as the whole expression of her own soul, the masculine is finally free to choose her, not because she is holding on, but because she has let go. Her sovereignty is not a wall, it is an invitation, the most irresistible invitation he will ever feel, not because she demands it, but because she embodies it. And in that embodiment, he remembers who he is too. So ask yourself, am I still waiting to be chosen, or am I ready to embody sovereignty and become the invitation that cannot be denied? Because when you step into your wholeness, he is no longer drawn to a dream of what could be. He is drawn to the living proof of what already is. At the end of the journey, after all the running and chasing, after all the silences and breakthroughs, one truth stands unshaken. Union begins with her. Not because she is meant to do the work for both, not because she must endlessly hold his hand until he catches up, but because the feminine has always been the one who feels first, remembers first, anchors first. She is the one who carries the codes of union within her very being. From the beginning, it was never about waiting for him to see her. It was about her seeing herself. It was about her remembering her worth, even when he denied it. It was about her embodying love, even when he feared it. And every step she took back into her sovereignty, every moment she chose herself, every time she let her silence speak louder than pursuit, all of it was preparing the field for union. Union is not a prize at the end of suffering. It is not a reward for waiting long enough or loving hard enough. It is the natural result of alignment. And alignment begins when the feminine stops abandoning herself, when she chooses her truth without apology, when she allows her heart to remain open, but no longer at the expense of her own wholeness. That is when the running and chasing dissolve. That is when the masculine begins to feel the weight of his own soul calling him forward. That is when everything changes. The masculine will act. He will rise. He will face himself through you. But that movement is not random. It is a response. A response to the frequency you have already anchored. A response to the love you have already embodied. A response to the field you set when you finally remembered who you are. This is why union begins with you, because you are not waiting for him to choose you. You are choosing yourself, and that choice sets the tone for everything that follows. So if you have felt tired, if you have felt heavy, if you have wondered whether your silence matters, whether your sovereignty makes a difference, let this be your confirmation. It does. Every time you stand in your truth, you shift the energy between you. Every time you choose yourself, you collapse the old dynamic. Every time you refuse to chase, you invite him to face what he has been running from. Your movement, feminine, is not small. It is the spark that lights the way home. And here is the sacred paradox. The moment you realize you no longer need him to come back in order to feel whole, that is the moment he feels the deepest pull to return. Not because you demanded it, but because your energy finally matches the truth of union. Two souls meeting as equals, not as halves. This is why union begins with you. Because you are not just the doorway, you are the temple. You are not just the one who holds the connection, you are the connection. And when you embody that fully, the masculine has no choice but to remember too. He may resist, he may delay, but eventually he will have to face what you have already embraced, the truth of this bond, the inevitability of this love, the sacred vow that neither distance nor denial can undo. So, beloved, let this be your reminder. You were never waiting for him. You were always waiting for yourself. And now, as you step fully into your sovereignty, into your stillness, into your truth, union does not just approach, it begins. Ask yourself one final time, am I living as the one who waits, or am I living as the one who already knows? Because the moment you choose the latter, everything shifts. Because union begins with her. It begins with you.